Hi everyone.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. Welcome to our first Widows Meaningful Conversation. And today we have two really amazing speakers. And our topic for today is why a widow-sensitive lens is in development and global affairs matters now more than ever. So our first speaker for today is Alice. If you wanted to just say anything about yourself that you want everyone to know, and go ahead.
Thank you, Tara, so much for organising this event. I know what hard work goes into it, and I'm delighted to, well, I feel actually very privileged to share the platform with Roseline, which is lovely. I'm a trustee and activist for Widows for Peace, and we are sort of activist trustees, so we're putting in quite a lot at the moment, which is very good for me. For learning about widowhood and widows. And I'm also a vice chair of National Alliance of Women's Organisations UK, and also a company member of UN Women UK. So bringing those three areas of expertise together. And my part of the talk this morning is on why a widow-sensitive lens in development and global affairs matters more now than ever. And what an amazing title at such a crossroads where there's so much happening, particularly concerning widows. So we're all short of good news on marginalised, invisible women, and by that I mean widows of all ages, and of course many other women as well, but up this morning we're talking about widows. So against that background, my bit of the topic is just to talk a little bit about what we mean by a widow-sensitive lens. And I want to share, first of all, a bit of amazing news that we heard very recently. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, the UN General Assembly will adopt its resolution on widowhood entitled Addressing the Situation of Widows. The text is scheduled to be adopted tomorrow, and you can watch that if you want on the UN web TV at 10 o'clock New York time. And with the growing number of widows as we sit here now in Ukraine, this is especially welcome. It's taken nearly 26 years of hard campaigning by the president of Widows for Peace through Democracy, Margaret Owen, and indeed many others to get this far. So it will mean that it's much more likely we will see countries beginning to put forward policy, legislation and procedures that are properly widow aware, widow sensitive, or will they? On researching this, I could only find a handbook on gender responsive policy making. Nothing about marginalised women, such as widows, so I do think we still have some way to go. You could see this resolution tomorrow as the beginning. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. I now come on to what I mean by a widow-sensitive lens in development. And this means funding, policy and legislation. In brief, to me, it means a deep, deep knowledge of widowhood and the multi-dimensional impacts of, for example, conflict, coronavirus, climate crisis, corruption, extreme poverty and more. It's intersectional. And so many civil servants, I don't believe, even begin to understand that. So let's look at policy making with the widow lens. I've only got a short time, and I thought it's better to go into a bit of detail with a knowledgeable audience such as this. Consideration of widows within the gender policy making process is crucial. At the moment, I doubt many policymakers give widows a thought. Integrating understanding of widowhood should be the responsibility of all who are involved in the policy making process across the board. Without proper knowledge of widowhood, the best laid policies, unless they are, fully widow aware, may actually end up as damaging to widows. Use of widow analysis in policy design, and to be effective, a policy must be grounded in evidence. And this is something the resolution tomorrow is really calling for in point 14, I think. Questions should include, does the policy explicitly address the widow dimensions of the issue? Or does the language used lead to the exclusion of the most marginalised women, such as widows? Point 14, as I just mentioned, highlights the need for properly disaggregated data based on age, sex, income, race, migratory status, etc. Conducting research and gathering properly disaggregated widow-sensitive data is key to providing evidence to build policy. Data that includes the 4 types of marital status, for example, or whether birth certificates are held or a death certificate of a woman's husband. Who will collect the data? How will it be used? Will there be any training? And once you've applied your widow lens, policies need to be collective. You need to have really effective widow-sensitive policy. You need to mobilize your allies. You need to frame your message, and properly done, it enables civil society actors to hold politicians and legislators accountable and amplifies the voices of ordinary citizens, and in this case, widows themselves. And Widows for Peace Through Democracy, we're particularly keen that widows themselves have the agency. It should come from them and from no one else, with support, of course, but it's their voices that are so important. Monitoring of policy and methods for data collection needs to be carefully considered. Is the design properly widow aware? Considering the safety of participants, confidentiality, respect and sensitivity. And mobilizing with male allies. I know this is a bit controversial, but men frequently, we may not want to accept it, but it's true, hold decision-making positions in local and national government. Offering widow-sensitive training is one way of engaging with men as allies and to advocate for widow-sensitive policy and more. Rallying men to the benefits of change that benefits not only widows, but also the whole family and the whole community. And I do feel that some of the men I talk to just waiting for the opportunity to become part of this movement. And I think now with this resolution, the doors will be more properly open to bringing men into the fold to support our cause. Communicating with policymakers is key. So widow-sensitive messaging is key to inspiring policymakers to support and adopt policy initiative and to actually push for its implementation, which of course is so important. And it's so easy to have the policy and it gets pushed to one side. And finally, widow-sensitive policy must not be held in a silo. All too easy to put it to say, there, we'll trigger the funding, but we'll just put it to one side and we won't do anything about it. It should feed into the broader gender agenda. If not, our work to bring a widow lens to policy tends to be marginalized and so prevents work from becoming institutionalized. So it never goes right across the board in government, and particularly I'm talking about local government. So just to sum up, a widow-sensitive lens should be applied to all funding applications, policy, legislation, a standard procedure. And with proper training, this just could become a reality, particularly with the resolution tomorrow, which will mean that more policymakers have to take notice of widows. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was brilliant. Honestly, I think you made so many good points, and I hope everyone has, thought about what Alice has brought forward. And if any of you have thoughts, opinions, please, after our next guest, make sure to say your piece. So our next speaker, we have Roseline. I have a small bio here for Roseline. So Roseline was a widowed aged 32 after her husband was killed in Kenya's post-election violence in 2007. Like many widows in her community, she had to go through harmful cultural practices and stigma often meted on widows. Her experience led her to establish Rona Foundation, which is her website. I will put it in the chat. So if any of you please go and show support to Roseline, that would be amazing. So it is a non-profit organization that supports and champions the rights of widows across Kenya. So that's a little bit about her. I think, she has more to say, and I don't want to take more time. So please, Roseline, take the stage.
Thank you so much, Tyra, and thank you, everyone. Alice, amazing points. Thinking about a widow-sensitive lens, I see widowed at intersections. As a founder and director of Rona Foundation and as a senior fellow of social and economic equity at the London School of Economics, the intersections are almost everywhere for me. And so there's a desire, if I go to the main points right away, there's a desire for peace, change, and some level of normalcy across the globe, wherever place you look, either on social media, on the news, everywhere. A quick glance around will show you there's that desire. But what I question, which nobody else may not, also may be questioning outside there, is who is topping the list of the injustices that comes with those desires? Whether you look at conflict and war, whether you look at the pandemics, or other long-standing gender issues that we all know of. Speaking of harmful traditional practices, in my case, they are so stubborn. They don't want to go away. They don't even want to be legislated. They don't even want to be condemned. To condemn them means you get ostracized yourself. FGM, child marriages, all these are at the intersections of widowed, and all of them touches the woman most vulnerable. Who is the widow? Let's just take two of them. Look at in those two in the categories I've mentioned. One, conflict and war. Women are leaving their husbands with their children to unknown places while their husbands are at war fighting, unsure whether they will see their husbands again. Some of those women will become widows, and we can see that in Ukraine, in Sudan, in all these areas that Margaret Owen is very passionate about. These women, some of them will be widowed without knowing what happened to their husbands or even how their husbands died. Take pandemics. COVID-19 is a widow maker. HIV was a widow maker. More men are dying today than women. They died in HIV in 1984 in the 90s in my community. I remember one time in my own family, two of my cousins were buried the same day, leaving young widows whose children I'm now caring for 40 years later. So widows are still holding that burden. I'm a widow of post-election violence. I work and live with widows of HIV pandemic. I am yet to start working with widows of COVID-19 who come to call and come to my office. Some of them were disinherited when they were in quarantine. What am I saying? Out of every 5 deaths, I was talking to a doctor friend of mine, and she said, out of 5 deaths of COVID-19, especially in 2020, 2021, 3 were men. That means there are more widows that we have data about them. So the need for a widow-sensitive lens at this time cannot be underspoken. I think that now that we have the UN resolution, this should be our call. Let's have a widow-sensitive lens in all spheres. Why is this important? It has taken the UN General Assembly resolutions 28 years. Margaret Owen wrote the first draft 28 years ago. Should we wait another 28 years, 30 years with all the data, with all the evidence, with all the stories we see around widowhood? I think not. I think the woman standing, why is it important to bring her on board? She's a woman standing when death happens. She's a woman standing when men die in war. She's a woman standing when pandemics rage communities at calamities. She is the one walking her community in a crisis. She's holding her family and community together. We can see that wherever you are, you can, in your own community, you will see this woman holding her community together. There was a research by Modern Widows Club, I think 2 years ago, that at 59, women in the US lose their husbands at the age of 59. What do we do with that data? What do we do with that evidence? While we are saying that we'll take another 28 years to celebrate a little gain at the UN. I think we can, in my community, lifespan is tagged for men at 40. I was widowed at 32. My husband was 34 years of age. I am an evidence of how young you can become a widow. What am I saying? I'm only reiterating what Ali said, that it is time for a widow-sensitive lens in development, in gender, in all the development spheres that one can think of. Infrastructure, policy making, funding. If you pick funding itself, that's a whole topic. Widow organizations are underfunded. Modern Widows Club, Widows for Peace Through Democracy, Rona Foundation, all of Come Together Widows, Global Fund for Women. These widow organizations are only holding together to even get these resolutions to here. We had to jointly bring our passion. Nothing else. We had no money to hold meetings, to hold conferences, to attend meetings. I remember the first UN address meeting that we did with the Widows for Peace Through Democracy. I had to record a video that was going to be played in the UN Assembly. I think, Alice, you remember that. There was no, you can't travel. You have no resources to attend these meetings. We used all manner of tactics jointly to get us here. So why would we be fighting? We are the most ignored and invisible of all, even with this document. Without funding, our organizations will still be struggling. So why don't we break the barriers in getting the funding space? We will only create and lobby for policies when we have the money to do it, when we have the money to back our words. So that's an area we could have a sensitive lens. What else can we do? I have 3 suggestions. And I'm big on evidence. I am very big on evidence. But I'm also saying we have enough evidence around. If we just go about seeking evidence throughout, then we will wait another 30 years. And the widows that will come next will wonder how come we didn't use what we have to break these barriers. So instead of seeking endless evidence, let's use what we have as proof, drive the change to get us in the right spaces with the right community, using this UN General Assembly resolution as a tool that, you know, it has come handy. We speak, we have the tool at our back now. So the evidence is all about us now. Number 2 of my suggestions, let's get widows into decision-making table. It is time we stopped talking to ourselves. We have addressed ourselves for a long time. Let's talk to the right people. Some of us know where the right people are. Nobody can do this alone. We must jointly get it together and speak to the people who need to hear us. And break the silence of, we are always in our meetings, just ourselves, talking to ourselves, with ourselves, sometimes even against ourselves. I think it's about time we can change that. And the last one, I think it is time to win bold male champions, because there's no cause for gender, including FGM, in whatever form, that ever succeeded, human trafficking, slavery, that ever succeeded without bold men on the table. Maybe they've been afraid, but with this UN resolution, we are breaking that space of fear and saying, this is a UN recognized issue. Come along with us. Let's win some male champions. And lastly, I remain hopeful that one day, doors like what has happened in the UN now, that's going to happen tomorrow, other doors, funding doors, policy doors, development doors, doors of intersections of all child, FGM, traditional practices, at community level and global, will open up for widows to be recognized, to be accorded the platform they need, and to be part of the development change that the world deeply desires. I remain hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so powerful. So, I mean, I feel really inspired. I don't know about everyone else, but I hope everyone has been inspired by both Alice and Roseline. So obviously this is a conversation. So if there's anyone now who would like to, say their thoughts or even share a question, please feel free to, anyone. Oh, okay. So Hannah, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so I was just wondering what, as a young person or a young woman, what could we do as individuals to support specifically policymakers taking a widow-focused lens?
Shall I start, and then I'll make a comment perhaps. Hannah, lovely, really good question. I think that we need to, organisations like the National Alliance of Women's Organisations here in the UK could run an article on this to do some publicity. I think maybe it's all the things that normally come up when you want to make governments aware, which is writing to your MP. It's also holding events where you have explainer events as to the changes that are taking place to small groups of students, perhaps within a FemSoc or something like that. And I think they're going to be, I have hope, like Roseline, in that we managed for many years, there was nothing to do with gender in any kind of policy making at all. It was gender neutral. So women en masse were missed out entirely in certain circumstances, particularly where funding was concerned. And I don't see why we shouldn't have, you know, a widow agenda properly in all development agencies. So in my case, I shall be, I'm part of the Gender and Development Network, which, Hannah, you might be interested in finding out more about. You can join. And it does talk about, it is to do with policy at DEFRA that is coming, or DFID, sorry, DFID, that is coming out. And I'm part of the humanitarian group. You have the opportunity to feed in what you hear on the grapevine where change is concerned. So one of the things I have recently been doing is talking about widows. And for some of these policymakers, they really know nothing. So they say, talk to us, tell us more. So with this resolution, I shall certainly be doing so. So Hannah, I hope that you feel that you can just make a few choices. You can find out more, join the GAD network, or educate some of your fellow students from what you've heard today, perhaps. But I think there's going to be a whole lot more. This is right. Anyway, I hope I haven't gone on too long. Thank you, Roseline.
Great question, Anna. I love the question that you ask, because it is a question that I get asked everywhere. What is it? Why should I care about this issue? What is in it for me? Why should it matter to me? It is a question asked by married and unmarried women. It's a question asked by men, married or unmarried men, single, dating men. They ask this question. My answer has always been one. An unmarried woman or married woman, man or woman, is a potential widow or widower. It just goes without saying. So when you go to, as a young woman, you go to get married, and then you go to church. Like my parents were Catholic, so they were huge on weddings, and they say, death do us part. What they don't tell you when you take that vow is that what happens after death do you part? What's going to happen there? And that is why you should care. What will happen there in my context is traditional harmful cultural practices. A man who came, I was 32, a group of men came 4 days after my husband was buried to come and sexually cleanse me, because that is what traditions dictate. And so for young women in my community, that is why they should care. What will happen after death do you part? Property and inheritance, succession laws, child care, trafficking, all the intersections of widowhood. That is why you should care. That is why you should have this conversation with your peers. And they say, while my life is successful as a young woman, while I've built a career, while I've built space for myself, beyond marriage, if you happen to find one, there is something called widowhood. And that means there's something that happens to the women there. And then educate yourself about it. And the other thing I ask girls in my community, I said, you may not want to care that much because you don't want to talk about death. It is a taboo subject. It's too painful. It is too far-fetched. It can only happen to certain people. That is still stigmatization and discrimination. But you may want to care what happened to your mother who is raising you as a widow. You know, bring it close to an auntie, to a cousin. What is their lifestyle? And you can be a safe space that asks questions that are widow sensitive. One of the questions that I get asked that are not widow sensitive, even when I go to media, is what killed your husband? That question, I find it very insensitive. So what do you want to do about it? What can you do? My husband died 14 years ago. So what really can you do about it? I am not here to mourn about, because those are the stories that media was telling when I came out to champion widow rights for the first time 14 years ago in Kenya. And they were asking those questions. I said, don't ask me that question, because that is not why I am here. I am here saying there's a gender inequality that is deeper than what you see. How my husband died is one way that I will get discriminated, is one tool that the people who discriminate me, disinherit me, distance themselves from me, use that tool. So be a safe space that ask questions and want to learn. And perhaps lastly, is to not be afraid, you know. I mean, knowledge has never hurt anyone. Knowledge, it hasn't hurt anyone. So speak with evidence. Speak and saying, I attended a webinar and there were 2 widows speaking there. I have read the UN resolution. And so back your words with evidence and facts and stories. I have seen women leaving Ukraine with their children and their husbands are dying. I mean, start by storytelling stories that appeal to heart and are truthful. And for me, those are some of the tools I've used in my work, because I only had my story. I have never had the money. I have only used one tool, which is my story, drive change.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Wendy, if you want to go next, I see your hands up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really powerful statements, and we all have to rejoice at this General Assembly resolution. My mother-in-law will have been widowed for 70 years in June. She's 91. She was widowed when she was 20 years old with 2 little boys. She's Iranian. And she was very fortunate in that she had a wonderful family living around her and supporting her. However, she came to this country to have a better life. Now she would be called an economic migrant, but she was only 24 years old when she came with these 2 little boys. And when I met my husband, I knew that his mother was a widow. And I asked him, we're getting married, and what is how do I address her? He said, I don't even know how my own father died, because my mother would not speak about it. I did ask her once when I was 12, and she burst into tears, and I've never asked her again. And she never spoke about it. She never spoke about the situation. And in her old age, I mean, she's 91 now, about 4 or 5 years ago, she suddenly started to speak about her situation when she was a widow. So she, how it happened, what happened. She was so traumatized by the entire episode, being a very young woman, no particular education except for high school kind of education, and having to come to a foreign country where she didn't know the language with 2 little boys, and not wanting to explain to anybody what the situation was, even to her own children. And I always feel, she sort of felt that it was an embarrassment for her, and that somehow she took blame for the fact that her husband died so young, whereas in fact he didn't. That wasn't the reason he died. He died because he was a test pilot and trainer for airplanes, and they didn't pressurize the cabins, and consequently he died of the gangrene that comes from unpressurized situations over a long period of time. But she didn't even know that. It took my husband, his doctor, to sort of do that research. So she was in the dark herself. People wouldn't speak about it with her. You know, so people, it's not only at the policy level, it's also at this very personal level that the people around don't know how to speak to people who've been in this, to women who've been in this situation. They shut it away, they make it difficult, they don't want to dwell on these difficult things, and therefore, although the family was very helpful, they didn't help her overcome that trauma. And as I say, she's 70 years a widow. She's never remarried in June. And she's never remarried because she said, I thought God didn't want me to have a husband. So despite being an attractive, well-versed person. So I mentioned this story, and that's why I've been interested in this, because of her story and the fact that personal effect that's always had on her. You know, she's a very strong woman. She's very, very able and so forth. But this sorrow at the heart of her life, beginning of her life, has really colored her life forever and colored the family, because my grandchildren know nothing about her family. My children know nothing about her. I know nothing about her. It's only recently we've discovered, and then you can begin to honor the kind of person she has had to be.
That's, wow, I'm a bit speechless by that story. It's a really interesting and touching story. So, Sally, Jackie, any of you have any thoughts, please don't hesitate to speak up. Sally?
Well, I was just wondering how young one could educate children to understand the complexity of the relationships they are going to be growing into. I think it was yesterday, there was a woman's hour or something, they were discussing marriages that were in difficulty because the man had superiority feeling and wanting to control the wife, even to the extent of whether she had a child or an abortion and so on. And that shows that we aren't educating the boys to young men correctly. Also, generally speaking, everybody's scared to talk about death. And yet, this is a very common occurrence, and people just skate over it and say, oh, so many thousand died, or somebody's off school for a day because some grannies died, or something like that. I don't think that the education system that most countries have, even our country have, give the young people the kind of understanding, tools and so on to cope with these problems. I think probably a child first realizes things die when they lose a pet, you know, but there are so many very clever books for children nowadays where tricky subjects are dealt with. And I think that articles are good and so on, but I think probably we need storybooks that help the children too. And I mean, very young actually, could be. So what do you think?
I think, Sally, what you're really talking about is training.
Yes.
I mentioned training in my talk, and by that I don't mean sort of formal training for children, but I think it's access, widow-sensitive access to a range of material that actually goes from primary right into lifelong learning, really. I think we all need it. And I think that, for example, 50 years ago, I don't think primary schools talked about gender equality or women's rights or any of those things. but now it's part of the curriculum. And I don't see why, particularly with this resolution tomorrow, that there shouldn't be this change in the way widowhood is understood, because I know that one of the big, when I've been doing sort of research of my own, one of the big problems when policy that is widow sensitive starts to come through, it stops at municipal level because the training just isn't there. And many men are municipal councillors, or they're not paid terribly well, and they don't receive the training. And that funding that should go to the most marginalised doesn't. And sometimes it's not necessarily because of corruption, it's because of ignorance. And I think, Sally, you raised such a good point, because the education on widowhood needs to start from a very young age.
A great question, Sally. This is the truth, from where I see it. I could be wrong. Tools that support fatherless children is not existing. It's not existing. And the reason it is not existing is that widow organizations are underfunded. So they can't even develop those tools. They can't write books. They can't write programs. They can't develop programs. And then there is the issue of we are in a world that is is money-minded. The world is focused on money, is not focused on humanity and the issues that touch those that are hurting. If I had a broken arm or I had a wound, you will see the wound. But when my heart is broken, you will not see it. And so people only care about the things they see. People do not care about anything they don't see. And so that is why these tools are missing. That is why these programs that are focused on fatherless children are missing. They don't exist. But the truth is, children recognize change. A father that will never come home, no matter which language you tell your child, a father that is missing, a dead father is a missing father. It is change, and the child will see that. They may not even be able to talk, but they will recognize there's something inside the human spirit that recognizes change, and they will recognize that. Yet in all these dynamics, this is the one person missing. Perhaps even the widow is now privileged. If you look at the widow and the fatherless child, the widow becomes privileged because there will be some focus and attention on her, but not the children. It is still, I am hopeful that while we are here, while we have this tool that the UN General Assembly will pass tomorrow, there will be room to even sit in, maybe in our future meetings, we should bring funders, we should invite funders, the Bill and Melinda Gates, the Oxfams. Let's send invitations to the right people and say, we need funding to develop tools that support fatherless children. I mean, what is sad about that? What is difficult about that? Who doesn't understand that? And so let's also ask the right things and ask the right people so that these tools can exist and we can create them. For me, my hope has not left me, and I think these things can be done.
Wow. Jackie, if you have anything to say, please go ahead.
Yes, I mean, this area is very new to me in that I would really have just become aware of it perhaps around 2016. I listened to or read reports from the UN Assembly in New York about the work Mothers Union were doing with widows in Africa. And I can identify with something Sally was saying there. Education in my professional life, I was a primary school teacher where we did actually put together some stories and some information for parents and children, and we did openly talk about it. And it was amazing the difference that made to families, and that it made to the connection they had with the school and the community. And it was something we were then able to share with other schools in the community. But it would be wonderful if something like that happened worldwide. I'm also aware that the organisation that I'm in is mostly women between 60 and 100, and a huge percentage of them are widows. around the world. And I think particularly in the UK and Ireland, I'm from Ireland, we do need to work more on this issue, and I really commend you. I've just found this session so enlightening and informative. In my own diocese, we have started on the 23rd of June every day. We now commemorate and hold events and encourage people to hold events, and we give out some worship materials for International Widows' Day to highlight what is happening abroad, as well as in our own diocese. Sorry, I don't really have anything to add to it, except that this has been quite inspirational, and thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. Hannah, your hand's up if you want to go next as well.
So my upbringing, I was around quite a lot of widows, just because I grew up in the army. So obviously we had quite a lot of kind of conversations about what that means. But I was thinking back to what Sally was saying about the books, and perhaps having like picture books for children about widows and things like that. Could WRI potentially look at working with Sally and maybe some other willing volunteers to maybe put together a children's book that does put across the message that you guys want young people to understand, specifically if you're aiming at primary school children? Obviously, having said that, I'd be happy to help if it was something WRI wanted to do, but it was just a thought I had while Sally was talking, actually.
Thank you for that. Wendy, if you want to talk about that as well, because I know you.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, maybe you could mute yourself, Tyra. I think it would be a helpful thing to have consideration, and maybe just working together as different widows organizations. You know, we could actually perhaps. I mean, I actually work in publishing myself, as some of you might know, and not that this would be our area, but just knowing how to bring people together, you know, collectively to write materials. I think the key thing here for the UK is likely to be two things. One is you really need to understand the educational environment in which that material might be used, and so you'd want to really be consulting with current teachers and perhaps the what we call a SACRE here, the Standing Conference on Religious Education, to get some backing for its introduction into schools. The other side of it is really, it's not so much not worrying about schools, but it would also just be, along with those materials that was spoken about, that there's, you know, children have all kinds of books now on all kinds of subjects, which perhaps a few years ago they weren't being taught. And it's really having a conversation with the publisher to say, you know, this is an area I would work off the back of the General Assembly resolution, because then it's topical and it can be done quite well. And maybe just the people on this screen could have a conversation about this, just to see how we might take it forward, getting the inputs from Roseline and others in terms of, you know, some of the international dimensions, because we wouldn't want it to just be a UK book, and to make it something that people are, yes, storybooks illustrating situation, exactly something like that. You know, it would have, the thing about education of children is, as people who teach them know, is that you have to be very careful not to create a problem where one does not exist. But education and information, and every child will have a granny or a granddad or somebody who will pass away in their lifetime as a young person. And to be able to openly speak about it, to not find it negative, it would be wonderful. So I think it's a very good suggestion. And maybe those of us who are Widows' Rights International and Widows for Peace could get together and chat about that as a project. We could do it collectively. That'd be a really great one.
Can I also make just a quick suggestion? to, if anybody has seen any children's books on other topics and they particularly like the style and they think that widowhood and widows would mesh well in that series, that's also a way in. And as a teacher, I kind of have a little bit of background to this, a little bit different to Wendy, but similar, because what Wendy was saying definitely resonates with me. But I do think it's not reinventing the wheel. Use what's already out there, what is tried and tested and accepted by the educational establishment. I have friends who've tried so hard, and it's because what they've put together is done with goodwill, but it is not. They have not got the partnership or the support of the educational establishment. It's absolutely key. Otherwise, you might as well not do it. So I think lovely points from everybody. What a wonderful group this is. And maybe, I don't know whether the Mothers Union has any publishing outlets. I just don't know. I know that my mother was a member of the Mothers Union, and I have a great respect for the Mothers Union. And I was just wondering, maybe this is something we could find out a bit more about. It seems to me that it seems quite instinctively a good link for the Mothers Union perhaps to perhaps lead a bit on this, because they must have deep understanding of outlets, of gaining the approval of the educational world. That's just my little addition. Thank you. Just turn off my...
Very great points, and what a team, what a panel, and what contributions, amazing. I think one of the things Jackie said that is also becoming part, I'm making it part of my work, is a celebration as a tool for change, especially looking at what COVID has done. And so she spoke about, her community of 70 and above. So how then do you make life meaningful in widowhood? So celebration becomes just not a tool for, it's a birthday, it's an anniversary, but it is also a space where they can also bring their wisdom and their space to also debrief and grief, based on what Wendy you shared. So for me, at my work at Rona Foundation, I'm making that part of a program that is consistent and it is running. Talking of books, I think this is an area that also is really called out for, and jointly I think we can achieve this. Nothing is stopping us. We perhaps ourselves, maybe we didn't think it before, but we can do it now. I have seen a group of in my network, dentists who have done a book for children, that you brush your teeth. This girl didn't have a toothbrush, and the whole of that dental care campaign. So we could also frame and be creative enough that we create a tool that a book is a tool that is both fun and educative, and yet also helps support grief. Because I think the intersection, what would be hard, especially in the context of my country, if a book is painful with all the traumas that comes around everywhere,
Yes.
Post-election violence. So we could be creative enough to think, how do we want to use the same tools as celebration as a tool, yet it is education. How do you celebrate a journey of a person until they die and beyond, and show this child that dying is a natural process that will have to happen. And so if your father is missing, it is not strange. The natural process of life has just happened. So this is something I would love to come on board if we pull it together.
I'm just aware of time, but very quickly, I teach adult students, and many of them are women in the community, and they're women who live in very narrow social settings, so they don't get the opportunity to go to our local adult education college, but they have very low levels of literacy. And there are many publications designed for adults which are easy to read. And I think perhaps that's a whole other area of adult education. And I think there are already publishers there who would probably be really interested with good illustrations. So I think something to take forward from this. Thank you.
So, so I will send an email to everyone here so that we can, go about this children's book idea, because I think it's a really good idea. Education is key, and everyone. I think widows is definitely a topic that not many people know much about. I'm going to be honest. I did a speech last year. I went into the process completely blind. But the research and the events that I went into, hearing people like Roseline and, everyone with their experiences on widows has really taught me a lot. And it's definitely a topic that I have become really passionate about. And I think these conversations are just amazing to know that everyone will come in to these events and just speak about different topics on widows and, coming up with solutions like this children's book. I think it's really helpful. So I will send that email to everyone after this is over. If anyone wants, have, a closing speech, anything, please feel free. I've put Roseline and Alice's LinkedIn in the chat. So if anyone wants to connect with through that, please feel free.
I'm going to just put my email address in because I'm actually, although I'm on LinkedIn, I just don't use it anymore, I'm afraid. So nobody would, so I'm just going to put my email address in. There we are.
So yeah. I want to thank everyone here who has showed up, who has, spoken to at this event. I'm really grateful to all of you. Alice, Roseline, thank you so much for opening this conversation. And I hope we all can stay in touch. I hope we, progress with this children's book idea, because I think it really needs to be done. If anyone else wants to say any last words, please just feel free.
Nothing
I'm
much
going to say
add.
try and check out the Widows resolution tomorrow if you can, and to follow its path. And also, I think another something for the to-do list is Widow Sensitive Toolkit that can be employed by local government officials for training. That's my addition. I don't know, Roseline, if you've got a point you want to action point.
I agree with you with the widow toolkit, because one of the things that made Rona Foundations stand to now is that I developed a widows training manual that is we used to train widows across the country and train widow leaders. Though it's localized, but it has some things that could be borrowed. And so I think those tools are what is next required here, because what is going to now sustain we've gotten to the UN, that's the highest level. But now we have to localize what the UN has done, and that requires tools that are sustainable in the funding and policy and, being boldly brave in speaking matters widowhood. And so I thank you all, and greatly, really, Tyra, thank you for a great session.
Sally, your hand's up, you can.
Oh, I want to just widen your thinking beyond just books, because there are so many media that you can use. And I was thinking what the children actually look at, and they look at, if they've got them, phones with Pokemon and you name it, characters and so on children's programs. I mean, I think if you just brainstorm, then you'll find the people who have the creativity, and then you can get going probably.
Tyra, I'd just like to say thank you to you for providing the platform for us. It's just been really fantastic to have your energy first thing on a Monday morning. I feel my week is set. You've set the bar high for this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I hope everyone has a good rest of their day and, a good CSW. Hopefully see you all soon.
Okay.
Way to stop the recording now.
Yep.